What is up, fellas, and welcome to another very special episode of Rewriting History with me, the Goob, and the third episode in my mini-series where I am fact-checking the vase debunkers. This is the second video from NightScarab, and this video is going to be a little bit different from the last one just because I have a lot less to disagree with in this one. I do want to reiterate one of the points that I tried to make very clear in my last video, which is that I'm not here to defend Ben. I'm not here to defend his ideas. I've been very vocal on my channel that one of the biggest disagreements I have with Ben is his idea that all of this comes from 12,000 years ago. I don't think it does. So I know that NightScarab's video is framed him versus Ben, and my video is framed me versus NightScarab. So I see how you could think that I'm on the same side as Ben, but it's really a triangle. There's really three of us going on here. So yeah, I'm not here to defend Ben. I'm here to defend the vases. So having said that, I am going to skip the first 8 minutes essentially of Mr. Scarab's video because I don't actually have anything to disagree with. So I'm just going to play his short little conclusion at the end of that segment so you can at least hear the point he's making. And I fully agree with it. I have nothing to add. So let's go ahead and get into it, and I will start playing his video here.
No stone jars were ever found in Toshka 8905 or any sites of that age. Only small lithic tools and stones for grinding. Most, if not all, images in Toshka photo montages like this one are from other sites. Ironically, all the photos falsely attributed to Toshka show no stone jars at all. This deceptive photo montage, or its variants, appears in at least 4 videos, as recent as a month ago. Currently, they have a total of more than 1 million views.
So, yeah, that's all true. If you want to watch the full segment, go check out Mr. Scarab's video on his channel. But I agree with everything he said there. He did great research. He made great points. There are no vases from 14,000 years ago. This is the oldest stone vessel that I was able to find from Egypt. And this is from the Gabel Remla. I might be the Gebel Ramla site in Egypt. This is about 8,500 years old, and it's this nice bowl right down here in the corner. You can see that this is 5 centimeters, so this looks to be probably less than 10 centimeters. So it's like smaller than 4 inches. That little handle, you couldn't even fit your hand on that. It looks a lot like a frying pan, but unless it's a frying pan for like a robin's egg, I don't know exactly what this is, but it was just the only little bit that I had to add there. This is 8,500 years old. This seems to be the oldest stone vessel found in Egypt. So, good job, Mr. Scarab. Appreciate your research in that section. And I'm going to go ahead and skip forward a bit more now because the next section is him debating the idea that it's not 12,000 years old, and I disagree with that. There are some little comments I could add, but I don't feel it's really worth it, so I'm just going to go ahead on to the next section. And here we go.
There are other pre-dynastic stone artifacts: arrowheads, knives, blades, mace heads, and pallets. In all categories, the objects show signs of being developed over time. The pallets probably started out as simple grinding stones.
So the question he's posing there at the beginning is, why only vases? And that's a question that you need to wrestle with yourself as well. And as you were just saying, all of the other stone tools are exactly what we would expect to see. They show progression. They get gradually more complex. They're what the kind of tools you would expect to see in a civilization as primitive as we're talking about. We're talking about pre-dynastic Egypt. We're talking about the Naqada culture. We're talking about 6,000 years ago. You know, they were still developing agriculture. So all of the other artifacts that we see, I agree completely. They're exactly what we would expect. And so that is kind of the whole issue here, is why are these vases so abnormal? How do you explain these vases that are appearing in a civilization that is still developing agriculture, that are precise as what we produce today? There's something there that doesn't add up. You need to wrestle with that question as well.
And they culminated in the famous Narmer piece,
which is a beautiful piece of art. This is for a king, King Narmer. I think I'll wait to talk about it a little bit later when he gets into it. But yeah, there's a lot more to say here about the Naqadans, the level of primitiveness that they are, and the discrepancy with these vases. But I think he'll bring it up later, so I will.
So why weren't these categories of stone objects inherited? Seems like the proposed ancient high-tech civilization left behind only vases, and no other useful, well-made stone tools.
These, like, you're acknowledging the discrepancy there, right? You're acknowledging that the vases are not in line with the other stone tools, but somehow you're not seeing that as an issue, which I don't fully understand.
Let's now return to the Badarian vessels. Many tend to have a distinct shape, a conical body and a protruding brim, like an inverted top hat. This shape preference is also visible in their ivory objects. Moreover, Badarians didn't seem to bury their stone vases in graves.
So I don't know if this is referring to a specific gravesite or if that's a general statement. Honestly, I struggled to find all of the images that you showed on your previous screen there of the Badarian stone vessels. And maybe it's because my research was focusing on Badarian grave sites. Maybe that's why I was struggling to find the vessels themselves. Anyways, if you are willing to share your research, I would genuinely appreciate it. I would like to learn more about the Badarian stone vessels. But these are a separate category. They're a separate style from the vases that we're talking about. I'm not entirely sure how they fit into the picture because, like I said, I need to do more research on them still. But there were Badarian, or at least stone vessels that were accredited to the Badarians found in grave sites. I personally think that they were falsely attributed to the Badarians. For one, they do not have that conical shape, that distinct shape that you're pointing out there. They have a later vase design. And these Badarian grave sites were in use all the way through Roman times. So the idea that a vase might get misattributed to them seems not unreasonable to me. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add on the Badarians. I need to research them more, but they are a distinct vase type. They're totally separate from the vases that we are focusing on and discussing. The Vase Scan project is looking at the Naqadan vases in later. So here we go.
Only pottery. These differences, compared to pre-dynastic stone vases elsewhere, suggest a separate development of objects and customs,
and I agree. Like I was just saying, I see these vases as separate. They're a bit anomalous already. Again, when you're looking at the level of civilization that the Badarians had, those vases would have been a huge amount of labor. But then there's another leap from the Badarian vessels to these very, very precise vessels of the Naqadan culture. And the Naqadan culture, I keep highlighting that they're still developing agriculture because I think that's hugely significant. In early Naqadan periods, their vase production was so high that, I'm paraphrasing from a paper here, but there was no distinction between rich and poor graves. Vases were found ubiquitously across all graves. They were buried with everyone, rich and poor. And then by the end of the Naqadan III period, vase production seems to have decreased pretty significantly, or at least vase burials decreases significantly, and you only find them in the rich and royal burials. And this was explained by earlier Naqadan periods being so primitive that they don't even have social stratification yet the idea of social stratification and wealth accumulation isn't something that their civilization had, dealt with yet. And so that's why you find these vases across all grave types, rich and poor. And then in the later periods, wealth accumulation happens, and so you only see it in the rich and the wealthy. Again, these vases are as precise as we produce today. This is a very primitive culture, still developing agriculture, doesn't even have social stratification, and yet they are dedicating all of this manpower and labor to creating these vases, and according to the mainstream, with very, very primitive methods, meaning very, very labor-intensive methods. Now, I don't buy these methods. I don't think these vases are even possible through these methods. They're far too precise. They do necessitate a lathe-like machine. But if we're going by the mainstream explanation, it's truly an extraordinary amount of labor that's being dedicated to these vases in a civilization that shouldn't really be able to dedicate all that labor to that. So let's continue listening and hearing what he has to say.
Not simply copying some supposed inherited sources. Production of hard stone vessels declined in Egypt towards the end of the Old Kingdom.
So there he is, still focusing on the Old Kingdom rather than pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, which is what we're actually dealing with here. Hard stone vases decrease at the end of the Old Kingdom. They decreased a few times throughout Egypt, and more significantly, they decrease around early dynastic Egypt, around the first and second dynasty. So as I was just saying, you have all of those Naqadan vases in abundance in early Naqadan times. Then there's a decrease as the civilization continues to progress. You have some other pre-dynastic periods, and then you have the early dynastic periods, which you see vase production almost come to a halt. And then you have Djoser in the first and second dynasty, vase production almost comes to a halt. Then you have Djoser in the third dynasty, who builds the bent pyramid, and he buries tens of thousands of vases underneath his pyramid, which could be related to that shortage of vases in the first and second dynasty. Could be some inheritance going on there, not 12,000-year-old inheritance, but inheritance nonetheless. And then immediately after Djoser, you again see this halt in vase production, and you no longer see hard stone vessels. You see a very distinct transition to alabaster. This is widely recognized in Egyptology. This is a widely accepted fact. This is not controversial. This isn't really debated. This is a widely accepted fact in Egyptology that in the third and fourth dynasty, in the first and second dynasty, you have a severe decrease in vase production, and then in the third and fourth, you have a switch to alabaster, to soft stone. So, he's being very misleading with what he's saying here, focusing on Old Kingdom. What we really need to focus on are these early periods here, and there are transitions from hard stone to soft stone in that period.
They still show up, just very rarely.
Those don't look nearly as impressive to me. These are thousands of years later from after the Old Kingdom, and just visually, they don't look as impressive. So thousands of years earlier, how are you explaining those remarkable vases?
Advocates of inheritance say it's because Egyptians ran out of the inherited vessels and had no skills to make them.
And as I was just saying with the Djoser point, I'm not showing the video, my goodness, my bad, fellas. But as I was just saying with the Djoser point, I think there are cases for inheritance to be made, not necessarily from 12,000 years ago, but you do sporadically see these very impressive hard stone vessels popping up in later periods of Egypt, and they're not in large quantities. Could those be inherited? Could those have been refound from previous times? I think that's entirely possible. I think there's definitely cases to be made for inheritance, just not from 12,000 years ago. Let me rewind slightly, just so there's the image. I do want you guys to see that image. Those are from after the Old Kingdom, and those don't look as impressive to me as the pre-dynastic vases, a civilization still developing agriculture.
But there's a problem. Those who make such claims are so heavily focused on Egypt that they forget Minoan Crete. Starting at roughly the middle of the Old Kingdom, ancient Egypt and Crete coexisted. Minoan Crete made hard stone vases, though not many, after the time of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Here they are.
So as you just said, these come from after the Old Kingdom period. So these are even further removed from the pre-dynastic vases. He keeps talking about Old Kingdom, but remember, we're talking about pre-dynastic vases here. So these are a couple thousand, almost 2,000 years removed from the vases that actually matter. And if you look at these, they're beautiful, they're impressive, but do these have the same degrees of tolerance as the pre-dynastic vases? Because if they don't, then your comparison isn't really a direct comparison here. And just looking at this obsidian chalice up here, again, pictures are not a fair way to make these analyses. But if you look at that top edge, it really doesn't look straight and even to me. So my phone started playing my video. So if you don't have the same level of precision in these vases that are occurring thousands of years later in a civilization that is at its peak and a substantially different level of progress, right? They're not still developing agriculture at the peak of the Minoan civilization. Your comparison here isn't a very direct comparison, but I do appreciate the comparison. It's a valuable one. It doesn't do anything to explain these precision vases thousands of years earlier, though.
If Minoans could make them, it means people in Bronze Age could make them, even if...
Again, you're focusing on the Old Kingdom. We're actually dealing with pre-dynastic here. They were not in the Bronze Age. They were not in the Bronze Age.
They were out of fashion in Egypt, or were no longer economical there. Of course, the expected response to this will be that Minoans somehow got a part of the hypothetical vase stash inherited by the Egyptians. They just lasted Minoans longer.
Why would that, of course, be the expected response? Here you are again, debunking something that no one ever even said. Don't do that, man. Don't do that. Work with things that people are actually saying. And no, I don't think that would be Ben's response. I think Ben would respond by saying, yeah, that's thousands of years later. That's a civilization that's in a completely different developmental stage. He does not, even Ben does not make the argument that no one can work stone, that it's impossible to work stone or granite. He recognizes that people do that. His issue is that people are working granite in the same degrees of precision that we are today, 5,500 years ago in pre-dynastic Egypt, in a civilization that's still developing agriculture. That would probably be the response.
But this can't be the case. Why? Because Minoan hard stone vessels include original designs completely absent in Egypt, such as this obsidian chalice, or this stunning drinking cup shaped like a spiral shell.
Yeah, I agree. I think these were made by the Minoans. I see no issue with that. They don't do anything to explain the pre-dynastic vases.
There are no such designs in Egypt, which means that it's Minoans who made these, not someone else. A number of false claims about the pre-dynastic Naqada culture are made in this context. Let's briefly go through these.
They were found in the Naqada culture, Naqada 1, Naqada 2. These are the precursors to the dynastic Egyptians. You're talking like 7,000 BC.
No, Naqada carbon dates to only 3,900 BC. Sounds like someone's trying to fudge the numbers by 3,000 years.
Everything else you find from these cultures from...
Just another reminder that I'm not here to defend Ben's words. So just making that real clear.
In these times, it's bone, it's beads, very primitive. They have to admit that there's literally no other stonework being done like this at that time. There's no statuary, there's no architecture.
Okay. Ben is making a very valid point here. I've made this point. Everything else we're seeing from the Naqada period matches exactly what we would expect to see. It is very primitive. Some of it's very impressive. They've got some beautiful art, but it's all in line with what we would expect to see from such a primitive culture that is still developing agriculture. The vases are not. And you can't even try to argue that, because that's the entire reason why we're having this conversation. That's the entire reason these vases are a story. That's why anyone is interested in them at all. The mainstream, the debunkers, and the alternate historians. It's all because they are so abnormally precise. They do not fit in with everything else we're seeing in this Naqada culture. They stand out greatly. So he's got a point there. The vases are not in line with the other artifacts that we're seeing.
We wouldn't exactly call the massive Naqada royal tomb no architecture.
This is beautiful mud brick work. It does nothing to invalidate Ben's point or the point that I've been making throughout this video. Beautiful mud brick. He's still got a point.
Given that its facade defined an art motif for the next few thousand years, including in Giza. These delicate ivory reliefs aren't exactly just bone.
They're also not exactly Naqadan. So the knife that they're on is a Naqadan knife, but these reliefs are not from Naqada. These bone handles or covers, whatever you want to call them, are not from Naqada. Even if they were from Naqada, you're still not invalidating the point that is being made. These are beautiful art on some bone. They're impressive. They don't explain the vases. The vases are still hugely anomalous, and this does nothing to explain that away.
These finely crafted palettes and soft stone vessels don't really qualify as mere beads.
No, but they are soft stone. They're specifically mudstone, a very soft stone, very easy to carve, and these were also reserved for the rich and the royal, unlike the vases, which were so prolific that you found it was like Oprah was living back then. You get a vase, you get a vase, you get a vase, right? Like everyone was getting vases, the rich, the poor, everyone. They're still developing agriculture, but they have enough vases to go around for everyone's burials. So, yeah, again, these soft stone palettes that were reserved for the rich don't explain the vases.
And neither does the great mace head of the Scorpion King.
And neither does the great mace head of the Scorpion King. A beautiful limestone piece for a king. A beautiful piece of art for a king. This is a singular piece of art. Beautiful. Doesn't explain why there were so many incredibly impressive vases in such a simple culture.
The inheritance advocates say that early Egyptians, unable to copy the hard stone vessels they supposedly inherited, switched over to the softer alabaster, and that Imhotep somehow directed this process.
So, as I pointed out, yes, this is an absolute fact. Not necessarily the Imhotep part, but the switch to alabaster is widely recognized. This isn't a thing that's even in dispute. There was a switch for the first and second dynasties. Vase production stopped. Third and fourth dynasties, vase production restarted in alabaster, not in hard stone. In alabaster, and in those vase styles that, Ben has shown and it have been associated with the third, fourth, and successive dynasties. So this.
And then, it all just changed to alabaster after that, because Imhotep came along and just figured out a new method of making vessels. I think exactly what was happening was Imhotep, being a genius, found out a way to imitate these hardstone vessels with alabaster.
Point 1. There is zero evidence that Imhotep had anything to do with making stone vessels. Point 2. Nobody quote-unquote switched to alabaster in the Old Kingdom.
Technically, that might be true, because he said Old Kingdom instead of early dynastic period, again, which is what we're actually dealing with. And yes, they did switch. 100,000% that switch happened.
Alabaster and limestone vessels were already made in the pre-dynastic era, along the hard stone ones, just like in the Old Kingdom. Throughout the whole early Egypt era, hard and soft stone vessels existed at the same time to serve different needs and different customers.
That's largely a true statement, but it's ignoring the fact that there were ebbs and flows in production and production type, and you see different types of stone come in and out of fashion. It's misleading for sure.
Curiously, When inheritance proponents show Old Kingdom soft stone vessels, we're usually shown the not-so-great ones.
I absolutely blame Google for this. If you Google pre-dynastic Egyptian alabaster vases, that is what you see are the not-so-great ones. I have found there are beautiful stone vessels from all periods of Egypt, or at least most periods, maybe like the intermediate, but generally speaking, all periods of Egypt have beautiful, beautiful vessels. And I'd like to dedicate an episode just showing those off. But yeah, it's not what Google shows you. So blame Google for that one.
Also seen some requests for handmade ancient artifacts to be measured or scanned. While I certainly think that this is worth doing, you really don't need to scan these sorts of artifacts to see just how not precise they are. I often point to the industry of alabaster vessel manufacturing that emerged after the Third Dynasty. And by simply using your eyes, you can observe that they're not precision-made artifacts. They're out of round, they're not symmetrical, not balanced, and are certainly the product of relatively primitive handmade processes using flint or other hard stones.
This makes it sound like the Old Kingdom lost the ability to both work hard stone and make clean geometric shapes.
Again, there was a very recognized transition to alabaster in the early dynastic period, not Old Kingdom. But yeah, like I said, there are beautiful vases from pretty much every time period. I do agree with that.
This is not true. Old Kingdom craftsmen were perfectly able to make clean geometric shapes, as seen here. Workmanship differs in quality in all eras. An honest research into the possible use of lathe-like techniques in early Egypt would include all well-made stone vases, not...
And I believe it is, right? The Vase Scan project is working on scanning all types of vases, alabaster, and I don't believe they're scanning ones that are visibly imperfect, right? Because like Ben said, there wouldn't really be a point in that. But yes, the beautiful alabaster vases, they're working on scanning those as well. They're working on it. It's a work in progress. Have a little patience. They're sharing, again, just going back to one of my points from the previous episode, if this were being done by scientists, none of this information would be getting shared currently. Absolutely none of this information would be available publicly, not until after it was all concluded. So the fact that they're sharing this all as they find it is incredible, but yeah, you got to give them time to keep finding it because they are still very much in the middle of this research. So let them do it. They're working on it.
Not just the hard stone ones.
From Barbie. I shouldn't have Verizon Whole Home Wi-Fi, so we get internet.
The defenders of inheritance keep belaboring the point that some pottery imitates hard stone vases.
So we're already in realms of technology that are well beyond what we think the dynastic Egyptians were capable of. You see this all over the place. This is a hard stone vase on the right, displayed next to a handmade, not spun pottery, clay pottery vase. And you'll notice that the clay pottery vase is even...
So this is actually another very important point that you really need to contend with, which is that these vases, the level of precision that we're finding in these vases necessitates a lathe-like tool. Exactly what that tool is, open for debate, right? But they necessitate a lathe-like tool. You are not achieving less than 1/1000th of an inch completely across the entire surface of your vase consistently with hand tools. It does not matter how many generations of expertise you're passing down. That's just not possible with hand tools. It requires a lathe-like tool. So it is very strange that you see these vases that require a lathe-like tool, and I would suggest a pretty advanced and robust lathe-like tool, very precise and robust lathe-like tool, 5,500 years ago. But you don't see a potter's wheel for almost 2,000 years after that. So they have the ability to make these vases which necessitates a lathe-like tool, but they don't have the potter's wheel for a couple thousand years. So it is interesting, and he is making a valid point here. You have these vases in stone that are very, very precise, and it would seem that they are attempting to recreate them with this pottery, and it's very strange that in order to make the stone vases, you need something lathe-like, but they don't have a potter's wheel for the pottery. That is something that you need to contend with. It is a valid point, I think. I think it's a pretty significant point. There's definitely an incongruence there.
And been painted to look like granite, right? It's imitation. And this wasn't spun on a wheel, this was handmade, but because they were found in the same burial, they're attributed to the same people.
Firstly, before you say these two specific vases were found in the same burial, you need to show evidence for it. Secondly, and more importantly, all this is irrelevant, as knockoffs don't tell you where the imitated items come from, only that they're desirable.
I actually agree with this point, and one of the things that I've learned doing this show is that history often doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. And it probably never will without all of the context of the time, and we will probably never have that. I'll give you an example from our modern times, right? Have you guys heard of the viral story about the Amazon tribe that got access to the internet recently? If a volcano were to bury them today, and 1,000 years from now, archaeologists were digging up that site, they would have a hell of a time trying to make any sense whatsoever from it, because you would have this Amazon tribe that by all other means and metrics is living like an Amazon tribe, but then they also all have smartphones, the pinnacle of our technology today. It wouldn't make any sense, not without all of the context of today, which wouldn't exist then. So oftentimes things do just not make sense. But again, what I was just pointing out, that huge discrepancy of not even having the potter's wheel, but having these vases, it is something that is hard to reconcile. It definitely doesn't make sense. So you're making a good point here that I do agree with, but I think you are glossing over just how big of an issue this is.
We also have knockoffs today, but the imitated items were not inherited from an older civilization. They're made today at the same time as the knockoffs. Cheap and expensive items in the same category are made in all eras. The cheaper ones do not tell you anything about the origin of the expensive ones. Why bring up points that make zero difference in terms of making your case? There is one excavation photo that may actually show a grave with a stone jar in situ. This is Petrie's photo from Naqada, previously unpublished, so the vase type is unknown. The photo on the left is unidentified. This page says it's from Naqada 3, without naming the source. There's no evidence that any vessels in this photo are made of stone. The label just says containers and pots. Neither photo adds anything new to the subject, because Naqada hardstone vases are well known, and no one disputes this. Again, why show photos which bring nothing new to the table?
Okay, well, that's the end of that. Yeah, I had a lot less to disagree with on this one than the last one. But I think some important points I made there, let me know what you guys think. I was planning on doing the third video this Sunday. That's still the plan, but it could change just because I only found these videos less than a week before I started making the responses to them. So his third video is his best video in my opinion, and I want to make sure that I give my best response to it as well. So if I've got it locked in by Sunday, I'll do it. If not, we'll do something else. Next Sunday, not this Sunday, but next Sunday, I've got Marcel Fodi coming on the show, the Natron guy, the guy who is dissolving granite and reassembling it, making fake granite, and supposedly solving all of the mysteries of our ancient past. So we're going to have a conversation with him. That should be very interesting. He's doing the experiments. So I think he could be onto something here. But even if he's not, like, he's really doing the experiments. He is gathering really valuable information. You know, it's people like him and work like the work he's doing that needs to be done in order to actually figure things out. So I love what he's doing. I'm really excited to have him on the show. Yeah, catch me on Sunday, potentially for the third part of the Night Scarab videos. And, you know, leave me a comment, leave me a like, subscribe. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out, fellas.